Welcome, everybody. My name is Joanne Greenlee. I'm the mental health navigator for the School District of Marshfield, and I'm on the board committee C. This is our Let's Keep Talking series, which is a partnership with the School District of Marshfield, MACY, which stands for Marshfield Area Coalition for Youth, and of course the Marshfield Public Library. Today, we have Sam Porter from the PDC, the Personal Development Center, to talk about relationships, healthy relationships. I don't remember what your presentation's called. You can see what that is, but we're going to learn a little bit about teen dating relationships, healthy relationships, and how caregivers can help them navigate through that. So, Sam Porter.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I am going to apologize ahead of time. It looks like the formatting and the presentation a little bit just in the headers are just a little wonky. So we'll kind of go slide by slide, and we'll kind of just talk about what a healthy relationship really entails for teens, what really is prevalent or what is going on within these schools currently that I see frequently, as well as kind of what, action steps or what things can be helped or done to really support this, as well as some social media stuff is incorporated as well. So just a little bit about the presentation. It does talk about sexual assault, school violence, and any other potential triggering topics. So if anything needs to be done for taking a break or stepping out, please do so. And this will, as you can see, be recorded. So if you want to go back and look at it later on, it will also be there. So before we get into the YRBS survey, just a little bit about myself is that I have worked at the PDC in the youth role for about 2.5 years. That youth role entails going into schools, meeting with youth one-on-one, doing preventative education, support groups, as well as I'm cross-trained. So I do a lot of things within the office, so restraining orders, safety planning, protection orders, things like that. I also am the visitation and exchange coordinator, so I do a lot of supervised visits and exchanges within our agency, and work with both offenders, victims, families, things like that within our shelter, and a lot of other aspects within our agency. So with the YRBS survey, I work closely with Joanne and the other school staff when we look at getting these results and kind of what the survey gets from the students. So if you're not familiar with the survey, it is all self-reported, anonymous. They take them every other year, or so every 2 years it is posted for the results. So they should have just taken the most recent survey in the fall, and so those results will be posted hopefully soon for 2025 and early 2026 typically.
Our school took it February of 2025.
Okay.
We'll probably get the results sometime during next school year.
Okay.
If we got them before the end of 25, I would be shocked.
Mm-hmm.
It will likely be in late spring of 26 that we'll get the results.
Yep. So then it kind of keeps up with the trends. When I did pull these reports, it is just what Marshfield has. And then again, with these all being self-reported, we know that there is not always accuracy. Some students may not have taken it, even though that it is anonymous. Some students may not feel comfortable sharing things. So this is hopefully going to capture a good amount of information, but we also know there's room for fluctuation. So when we look at this just shows that the amount of students who participating in sexting within Marshfield. So this is going to be just the high school that I pulled data from, and what those percentages look like. So as you can see, as they're in high school, it does happen more often, and then females are more prevalent than males. But then later on in the presentation, we'll talk a little bit as well as what that looks like, what sexting is, and how it relates to all of this. Just wanted to kind of highlight what the sexual assault or the rape, IPV, so teen dating violence, things like that, is also how many students have reported that they've experienced it within their relationships. Joanne, I don't know if you remember off the top of your head, when we look at 20%, what would you feel that would be close to as in numbers?
About 1,000 kids took the survey, so
okay.
That's easy. So 20% is 200 kids.
Yep, so about 200 kids. So, I mean, you look at 11th grade, it's a lot. Or if you just look at each grade, that's a lot. But again, also knowing that there may be a little bit of fluctuation. Social media. We love social media, right? So this is students who do not use social media. You can look at the 3%, 5%, 6%. That says a lot, right? That means that other 94%, 95%, they're all on social media. We know that it's a big part of their days. We know that iPads or their phones are in their hands likely most of the time at school. So there's a lot of access that they can use to any of the internet as well. And then on the contrary, there's that for the students who do use social media at least once per day. A lot of the students or the teens that I work with tell me that comes out to about 6 to 8 hours a day they're on social media, whether that's in between classes or in their study hall. They're checking Snapchat, they're Snapchatting middle class study hall. And there's thousands of apps out there, which we'll kind of talk about as well, that are accessible to them in the different ways that they can utilize them.
Just so you know, we just got the middle school youth risk behavior survey for 23. For whatever reason, it got stuck.
I was going to say I did not. Yeah, I didn't have those yet.
It just got released. And so I'm working on that. There's a presentation that we have available on the district website for the high school data right now. And before the end of April, the middle school data will also be up there if you're interested. The numbers are actually surprisingly similar.
Okay.
They don't ask the exact questions. So there's not a question about, I don't think there's a rape question on the middle school one, but there is a sexting question.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers are pretty similar to high school. So that is certainly, it's more prevalent than you would wish even at middle school.
Wonderful. I'll have to look at those. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about teen dating violence is much more relevant and occurs much more than a lot of us or many of us even know that it's happening. When we look at those pictures that I have up there, those are from Wisconsin. Those were posted on our End Abuse page. So they do show that nearly 1 in 11 female teens, as well as 1 in 15 male teens. There could be a little bit different of fluctuation in those numbers, as these are, I think, about from 22, 23. However, as you can see kind of farther down where it's in the red, it says only 9% of the teens have ever told anyone about the abuse. So if we're getting those numbers out of 9%, it's really kind of a big picture that you have to look at to see what are we not getting, right? What are we not taking into account, or what really is happening? And when we look at some of those, so 60% of teens know a victim of either teen dating violence or sexual assault. And then we just look at, what do others, so that bystander effect or that bystander intervention, what do others know when they have friends that are in their friend groups and, their friend may confide in them, or they may know something's going on. You look at the 40% of teens say they would not know what to do if they were to witness dating abuse or sexual assault, or 46 who have known a victim of dating abuse didn't intervene. So they didn't say anything. They didn't do anything. They may not know how, right? There's a lot of information that teens don't have access to, and they don't know what to do. So it's a lot of that education and that resource giving that I like to do, and I like to talk with my teens. Just a few more statistics that I really like to highlight, just because they don't always view it this way. But 63% of teens use sexting to appear funny or flirtatious. So when I say that, that means that within text messages, there is a lot of comments. I think the more recent one that I have been hearing from my teens is that they will make comments referencing to sending nude pictures or, pornographic looking pictures where they're either half naked or things like that, because they're trying to appear funny or they're trying to flirt. However, that's where it can go down a whole different road and a whole different conversation and what that can look like. But just to know that these are happening, and that 2 out of 3 teens who are in an abusive relationship have never told anyone about it. So again, that goes into that 9%. All right. So not really fun fact, but fun fact is that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month as well as Child Abuse Awareness Month. So within those two, our agency does a lot of collaborating with the Child Advocacy Center, and we do a lot of awareness in terms of the cases or the prevalence that is going on in our community, and kind of how many families we've helped and how many families are being seen. This RAINN statistic is from 2021, and this just shows 8 out of 10 rapes are committed by someone they know. So again, going back to those stigmas of this is not somebody that is hiding in the bushes. It's not a stranger, right? It's somebody that they know or that they may be in a relationship with, or that they live in the same neighborhood of, a family member, things like that. Okay, so relationships and what do those really look like within the teens? So relationships are going to be in a lot of different areas. As you can think of, likely yourself, you have many different types of relationships. So you have your work relationships, your family relationships, your extended family relationships, neighbors, community members, at your church, any support group or your clinic, anything like that. There's a variety of different relationships, and they're likely all going to be different. When we think of that as adults, and if you can think of maybe different relationships and how you have different boundaries or expectations within those relationships, that would be for the same for teens. However, they need to learn how to set boundaries. They need to learn, what is healthy, what is unhealthy, where does it get into that, that abusive or that not acceptable frame for themselves. So this is a grid that I like to use very much with my teens because it kind of highlights what they should be focusing on or within themselves and how they can set up those boundaries. So when we look on the left on that blue, what a healthy relationship means to both you and your partner or your friend. When I talk to my 7th graders or 8th graders, they're coming from elementary school. They're in that, that weird in between age where they're not a kid, but they are, and they're not really a teen, but they're an early teen, right? So there's a lot going on for them. That's puberty. They have a lot of transition, school, sports, potentially getting a job, depending on, what they're looking at or what they're doing. So there's a lot of different things going on for themselves. And to set up what a healthy relationship looks like for themselves within their relationships or their friendships can be very difficult for them to understand. They could feel that things are normal when they're not. Especially when we talk about, a lot of my examples that I use with them are going to be those disrespectful. So that does fall in that middle for unhealthy, but what does disrespect look like to you? So when I go to schools and I talk with the teachers before I give presentations, and I'll ask them, okay, what are you seeing within your classrooms that you're struggling with? And I've had teachers tell me like, oh, name calling or hitting, they just can't keep their hands to themselves, like setting up, because then you will have those kids that may not feel comfortable saying anything because they're not comfortable with their friends joking around and pushing them or calling names, even though their friend may think that they're kidding. The other person does not feel that way. So I have a lot of conversations to really sit down and talk with the person or the youth on what they feel is okay for them in a relationship, because again, each one can look very different. They may feel that with their best friend, they can have a whole different type of boundaries than they can with just some kid they have in their 7th hour that is their partner on a project. When we look into what those abusive look like and what they can do about it, it's really identifying when it turns into unhealthy or abusive. And that's harder for those, for teens in general, to be able to do that, because there takes a lot of dignity and a lot of courage to be able to do that, because high school is hard. Friendships and peer pressures friendships and their peer pressure, their groups, that's everything to them, right? When they're there, they're spending 8 hours a day with these people. To be able to set up those boundaries and be confident enough to have that conversation with somebody that they feel is a friend, there's a lot that gets put on them. So to be able to prepare them and have those open conversations is really important. I do always like to use this as well if it gets to it, but this is really just our power and control wheel that we give for examples to any teenagers. So more often my high schoolers, or when they get more into the dating realm and those relationships, really having them understand what that power and control looks like. So when we talk about that intimidation or the using the social issues, and I do have some copies up here as well if you guys would like to take some, or I can certainly give it to Joanne to post or things like that. But when we talk about those social issues, to treating them like a servant, or, oh, I'm dating them, so it's okay, I can tell them what to do, kind of that bossing around, or making all the decisions. So I see this a lot within friend groups. Jealousy is a big thing. Oh, you can't be friends with that person because I don't like them, or because I was friends with them and they were mean to me. A lot of that controlling. And then that can tie right into those peer pressures or those threats of, if you're friends with them, or if you're going to go to do this with them, we're not going to be friends anymore, or I'm not going to date you because you shouldn't talk to that person. It seems easy for us to look at, or if you think about it, like, oh yeah, why would you want to be friends with someone like that? But when I talk to my middle schoolers and the high schoolers that I meet with, or I just hear those conversations, that's not their mindset. Their mindset is, I don't want to be the odd person out. I don't want to be the person that looks like, I don't want to hang around with them. I don't want to say anything. I don't want to put myself at risk for being made fun of, for standing out, for being isolated. especially when I talk to some of the kids that are in sports. If they're going to stand up to who is identified as like a captain of the team, or the really good player who's seen as like the varsity player, anything like that, they may feel like they can't say those things because they want to feel as part of the team. So there's a lot of those conversations, and having the education to give to them and empowering them to say these things, to find different ways to say them or how to handle them, things like that. So I talked a lot about this, kind of just different examples that I hear from the teens. So how to be able to identify what the warning signs of an unhealthy relationship look like. This can look very different for each child or for each youth per se, but really just hearing them when they're talking in their group chat, or if they're saying things like, oh, so-and-so called and wants to know if I can go do this. If you recognize, especially when they start into those dating relationships, that they make comments such as, oh, I can see their location on Snapchat, or I have had a few youth that I work with that I'm not sure if you all are familiar with Life 360, but that is intended for parents and for families to have for their children, or even for themselves, so they can see where they're at. I've had a lot of parents use it for when their kids are coming back from sports, so they know when their bus is going to arrive at school, different things like that. I have worked with youth where they have a Life 360 account and all their friends are added on there, or their significant other at the time, their relationship. So there's a group of 20 some kids. You can see your location 24/7. While in their mindset, they're like, oh yeah, whatever. Like, we're best friends. Like, I can know where they are. It's not a big deal. It can turn very quickly, or it can look at, constantly needing to know where you are, who you're talking to, what you're doing. I don't know why somebody needs to know where you're at 15 years old at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday. I would think you should be sleeping for school, right? Or, that you should be there. You shouldn't really need to know where they're at. However, these are very common, and it's continuing to grow in terms of there's Snap Maps, there's, I know Instagram or Be Real, you can track your location. There's a lot of different things that this ties into it, where it keeps coming up. Same with getting mad when you're talking to somebody else about your relationship. So there's friends, venting or talking about things. The other person's like, well, don't say anything. This is our relationship. What happens in our relationship stays there. It's like, okay, well, having that support and being able to talk about things is extremely important, especially within those teens. It's not as often that these hard things are being talked about with parents or adults. There's a lot of confining in each other when they're teens. Their best friend probably knows 98% of their life, whereas they feel an adult may not know that much because they feel much more comfortable talking to their friends. So just a little brief about consent, because I do talk about this as well, but there is a lot of misconception of what consent looks like in Wisconsin in terms of any sort of sexual relations between teens. So anything, including sex, I shouldn't say anything. So sex, you cannot consent to until you're 18. Even if parents know you can have sex, there's a lot of teens that think, oh, yep, if I'm in a relationship, it'll be fine. Depending on the situation, law enforcement, I know both Tony Klein and Brody Erickson at the schools, they're great in terms of being able to provide what the outline looks like and intervening or having conversations with parents on what that looks like on their end. But there's a lot of misconception of what that looks like. Depending on the situation, I've had teens tell me, oh, there's this Romeo and Juliet law. That is not in Wisconsin and other states. That is covered in terms of if you're in a relationship between 16 and 17, sometimes 15, if they're in a dating relationship, they can consent to it. However, I'm not sure where this information comes up because this is not in Wisconsin. So in Wisconsin, you cannot consent to anything until you are 18.
It gets really interesting and confusing in a school because there's the law. That is the law. And then there is sort of the practice of the law in terms of like social services and making mandatory reports and that kind of stuff. So mandated reports, and when do you report something to social services that there's abuse or neglect going on, right? So if you had a 15-year-old having sex with a 25-year-old, we all know we would probably report that, right? Because there is a large discrepancy. And the further the discrepancy, the easier it is for us to distinguish that needs to be reported to someone, whether it's law enforcement. It's usually law enforcement because the person's not a caregiver usually, right? But then when it gets closer in age, there's a whole grid that social services uses about what's a mandated report and what's not a mandated report. And I didn't bring anything like that with me because I didn't think about it. But I think 15 is sort of the magic age. So like 16 through 18, you don't report those, even though they can't consent. It's not a mandated report. Somebody could report it, a parent could get law enforcement involved if they wanted to, but the school's not obligated to report it. 15 and under, we report anything, no matter what age. And so, so it gets complicated, and I might not even be recalling it exactly, because honestly, when it comes up, I have to pull out the little grid and pay attention to what it is, because it's weird, because our age of consent is 18. So there's a difference between the age of consent, the age of mandated reporting, what parents do or don't do, what law enforcement does or doesn't do. And so it can get really sticky. The biggest issue, of course, has to do with, I'm sure, you sort of got this with the sexual assault stuff, when someone has been hurt in that relationship, and especially when there's a imbalance of power and control. Those are the big things to look at. Not that we would say it's okay for teenagers to have sex. Generally, we would like them to wait, but at the same time, sometimes things happen, and we don't want to criminalize kids either. So trying to find a good balance and a good way to talk with them about it really is the key thing.
Yeah, and every situation, like Joanne kind of said, it's going to be different. I will say that I go to schools in all of Wood County, so mainly Northwood County, Pittsville, Auburndale, and then the all Marshall area. Occasionally different, like in Marathon County, so Stratford, kind of the surrounding areas, and then all of Clark County. I will say that out of all the youth that I work with, and I think with it being April, or within this school year, since September of 24, I do see about 50 to 60 youth, or have seen 50 to 60 youth. I will tell you that most of my teenagers that I am working with, that are anywhere from 13 to 17, all have reported that they are sexually active. So when I talk about this, it's because it's not those 16 and 17-year-olds that are in relationships that are having sex or doing any of this stuff. It's getting much younger and younger. Our End Abuse coalition that we work with within Wisconsin, they talk about a lot of youth stuff, and then halfway through I think towards the end of the presentation, there's a little bit more local or specific resources for teens. But their reports that they're not finalized yet, but they're hoping to get out, is going to be more focused on a lot of the changes within the dynamics of things happening. So any of the social media use, the access, the things that they're doing that they're quote unquote not supposed to do, is happening younger and younger. I think there's a lot of middle school students that we're not getting data from that are definitely participating in this stuff, from my personal working with them, that it's just more important to talk about and to have that knowledge of, because it's going to continue to be prevalent and it's going to continue to happen. So I go again over this with the teens that I work with, just some information on consent and what that looks like. So essentially I tell them, if it's not a yes statement of a yes, it's a no. So having those conversations. So you can't read it fully, but it's like, if healthy relationships are that simple, why do unhealthy ones exist? Why are we even here talking about it, right? Why is this something we need to have a conversation of? And this does go back with the Relationship Balancing Act. This does go back to that power and control wheel that I talked about a little bit before. But it is really being able, again, to identify those boundaries and know those other boundaries as well. So when individuals or the youth that I work with are really identifying those boundaries, it's making sure that when they identify safety, what safety means to them and what they feel. We don't know where kids are coming from. We don't know their backgrounds unless they share them. So everybody is very different, especially if we get into, any traumas or things like that they've experienced when they're younger. Some friends may be fine with goofing around, pushing each other. Others, if they've experienced abuse or anything like that when they were younger, they may not be okay with that. And that's where they need to be able to have those boundaries and be able to state those and feel comfortable outlining them and identifying them. And then they're going to continue to change as they get older. So I know for myself, my boundaries and my friendships and what I had expectations for when I was in high school or middle school are very, very different than what it is now as an adult, right? You grow, you change, your career, your path changes a lot. So being able to kind of self-evaluate and check in for what you feel is best for yourself is what I advocate a lot with those teens. Because again, even from 7th grade to 9th grade, that's a big jump and a big change, right? They're two very different kids. Or they have different things going on. So being able for them to identify that is really important. All right. So why are we even talking about this? So again, when we talk about kind of those effects of trauma, what trauma all really does to a child, I really like to outline this because when we think of trauma, we may think of those big ones: anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. But we kind of forget about everything else that goes back into it. So that's where it is important to identify those boundaries. I also like to highlight it as well because when people may break those boundaries or they may have a friend that reacts differently to something that may have happened in a friendship or in a relationship, common trauma responses, a lot of them that we all knew or that I knew, 10 years ago, flight, fight, and freeze. Those are the common ones. However, when we talk about fawn and flop, those are two newer ones that they've identified. And it's just different ways that you can respond to trauma or to sticky situations per se, or where they don't feel comfortable. So you may not need to have a trauma when we talk about this to respond this way. So it could be in a situation that, you've never experienced before and you feel uncomfortable. So when we talk about the flop, that can be they are caught off guard. They just sit there, they freeze, they freeze, which you'd think would be that, but they really they don't know what to do. They can't respond. Their body shuts down. Or I'll see a lot of the fight. So that anger, the aggression, they fight back. They feel they need to be defensive for whatever reason. And that, again, while it's identified as a trauma response, they don't per se need a trauma. They could have just had a bad experience in a friendship. They could have just had something not go well for them previously, or it could be a new situation where maybe that freeze comes up more often, where they shut down or they isolate because it was their first breakup. Things like that. I see that in middle school more, but their heart's broken after 2 weeks of being with, who they thought was great because it was their first relationship. And I can't remember back when I was in middle school what that looked like, but I can imagine there is a lot of different feelings that come with that, right? So when we talk about just those reactions and how their attitudes and their behaviors may change is really important. All right. So when we get into how teens themselves can keep themselves safe, it's really just being able, again, to identify what they feel or what their knowledge looks like, what they feel is important to them, and really just educating them. These topics are not fun. I know that. I work with a lot of parents, and when they, ask questions or they talk to me, it's like, how do I even talk to them about it? Like the parents don't know what to say. They feel it's awkward. The teens may be like, oh my God, Mom, I don't want to talk about this. Like they may not want to talk about it because it's just not, it's not something that's an easy conversation to have sometimes. So being able to just keep the conversation going, and as a parent, but both the teen themselves, knowing what they have. So being able to stand up for themselves and know their limits or their boundaries. Use safe practices. So, as we talk more about that, it's when they are, I'm trying to think of one that I had a few weeks ago. So when they are, I had talked to one of the girls that I had worked with, and she said that she was scared what this girl would do to her or say to her because she stood up for herself. And this other girl was identified as a bully or felt that she was being bullied. So having that conversation of she didn't go anywhere in the hallways without a friend if possible, or she stayed back and she took a different way, things like that. So that could go into, use safe practices or safety planning, things like that. But then she also did really well with standing up for herself and being able to identify those boundaries. I think we'll talk a little bit more in this next one. So being able to communicate with the child or the youth and how to help them. So when I said a little bit more about the topic, it's not a fun topic. I know that. There's times where my relationship building or my rapport with youth is a little bit different, but it's even hard for them to look at me and be like, I don't want to talk to an adult about this. Like, this is weird. Like, there are things that they'll say and they'll kind of tiptoe around certain words. And they're like, it's weird to tell an adult this. I get it, but just being able to be open and honest and really thoughtful around those conversations and being able to establish that line of communication. So there's a lot of times where I myself as a parent, even though my children are younger, I cannot imagine, having my child tell me at 12 or 11, or even when they're older and in high school, they're doing things that I would be like, oh my gosh, why are you doing this? Or what is going on? But being able to have that communication and for the youth to not feel like there's going to be an immediate punishment or there's going to be an immediate disappointment. As a parent, it can certainly be very hard to have that, that initial reaction or to have that that mindset of you're super mad, right, of what they're doing, or you're disappointed or you feel defeated because you thought you did everything you could to teach them these things or to outline what you feel is best or what they should do, and then they may do something else. But to really have that communication of letting the teen or the youth know, like, hey, I'm upset right now, but I definitely still want to have a conversation with this and let's talk about it. So being able as a parent or a caregiver to really just be able to identify what you can do to help yourself be that person. Because from what I have been told from my teens or the youth, but when they feel that their caregiver or their parent is not supportive of their initial, like their comments are, well, my mom will kill me. A lot of comments like that. Not that it would per se happen, but their statement of, oh, they'll be so mad at me. I'll be grounded. My phone will be taken for weeks. That can't happen. Like that's their lifeline. So to have that conversation of there will certainly be consequences, but let's also talk about it, right? Like, why are we here? What is, where did we feel that we couldn't make choices, or what happened, or what was the situation? And being able to just really open that up and have a good conversation about it. And then when we talk about knowing those warning signs and changing behavior, I see this a lot within the teens that are dating or starting to date. So any changes of their interests. If you notice that they used to go hang out with their best friend all the time, they wanted to go there every weekend, and then all of a sudden, after they started dating their partner, they no longer hang out with that person. They no longer want to ask to go over there, go do things, go to the movies, and they're constantly staying up late on their phone, texting or Snapchatting or whatever that looks like, FaceTiming. Having just those conversations, checking in, may not per se question directly about it, but you could address it and like, oh, I haven't seen you ask to go hang out with so-and-so, or I haven't noticed that you wanted to go over there. Having those conversations and see, because that's where some of those things that we talked about earlier with that power and control could come into play. It could just be a normal part of a relationship where all their attention is focused on that other person. But then that would be a good gateway or a good way to kind of jump in and have those conversations, or have them look at what, those boundaries look like for them, and kind of evening things out. And then I know I briefly brought up a little bit about understanding what that pressure and the risk that teens face. So a lot of peer pressure is within their day. Social media, their social image is extremely important. I didn't include it on here, but the presentations that I give to some of my youth for preventative education, I cannot remember the exact number, but it was close to 85% of teens identify feeling good about themselves if social media makes them feel good about themselves. So if it's those pictures that they post of them and their relationship, how many likes they get, or how many people view it, or how many people may, see it on their Snapchat story. If they don't feel like they meet these standards, they don't feel that they're up to a good level, or they feel pressured to be at that good level. So they continue to post pictures, or they don't, or they would never say that online, or they would never be seen, in a picture. So there's a lot of things that they feel is very much a big part of their lives, and that is present within them when we talk about social media. And then I do have a handout up there, but it does talk about model behavior. And when we talk about monkey see, monkey do, that's when it goes back to those boundaries. So one of the studies that was conducted, and I believe it was out of California, but they had talked about how teens that had taken the survey, was about 2,000 teens in this district in California, but 2,000 of those teens that took the survey, it was about 92% that responded, but then 80% of them had said that their relationships and what they felt that a relationship looked like came from their parents. So if they modeled, they saw a parent who identified their friendships kind of looking a certain way, that's what that child had identified their friendships being good, or what those boundaries looked like as well. Same with relationships or work relationships. If they're a yes man, or they say everything, they say yes, or they're a people pleaser, is what others say. They can also be modeled into that, and they can see that as well. So just know that that's something that teens definitely do take into account when they identify those things, and they may not even realize it. All right. And then as the caregiver, the parent, just really educating yourself. I mentioned this a little bit, I think, before we started and maybe at the beginning, but there are so many social media apps out there. And they are not always intended for what they're supposed to be. So I know when I talked about Life 360, that was not the intent, right? For Friends to have 20 some people on there knowing your location. It was intended, or it was invented for safety and to make sure that families had that peace of mind, especially when you have those in-between ages where they may not be super responsible to go out of town with their friends when they just get their license, but you still want to give them a little bit of freedom or to try, things like that. You can have that peace of mind. That's what the app was created for, but it's not maybe being used for that. As well as safety purposes. So when we talk about the sexting, I know sextortion is a big one right now, that, a lot of the media is talking about, as well as, we can get into human trafficking, a lot of other conversations, but a lot of those things, those common apps. So Snapchat, Kik is another one. And there is, I think they said there's a gaming one. So there is Discord as well. A lot of those are being used for the purposes that they're not intended for, but also those safety features on there. There's a lot of things going on that cannot always be flagged or controlled as fast as we would hope they would be. I know Snapchat does have a third-party monitoring, so anything that they feel is inappropriate or should be flagged does get kind of like sent off to the local police department. However, there are many different ways things can be sent through. There are many different ways that they could potentially be missed. They could not be highlighted. So just having those conversations and knowing what's on the youth or the teens' phones in terms of what the app is. And I know Googling it too is my fastest way to figure out what some of these are, because there's some of them that teens will say to me that they're using, and I'm like, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about right now. I didn't even know this thing. And then just having those open-ended conversations with the teens, with their friendships and dating, and then just know what their local resources are within the area that you are in to give more guidance or knowledge on. So I know within our agency at the Personal Development Center, there's my youth program that I'm working on, or that I'm in, and I meet with those teens and the youth, but there's also multiple other programs within town. I know the school district, the staff there, the guidance counselors, or their school psychologists, social workers, they're educated on, what these teens and what these kids are doing, or, what they may be seeing within the hallways or things like that. I know the Child Advocacy Center, they do a lot of education as well in Children of Wisconsin. And then just really anywhere else. I know that the clinic, they also have different programs and things that they'll talk about. I think Joanne can mention at the end a little bit about the conference that they have next week, and they'll have different areas they also collaborate with that can give further information on specific things. All right. And then just some reminders about being supportive and asking questions with your child, because their world is very different than what it used to be when you think about, because like I said earlier, I know I am not that old when I say I graduated about 10 years ago, but 10 years ago, the world was very different. So to think about that, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it is not the same thing. So to know that they identify things very, very different on what they feel is important to them and how they view themselves. All right. And we talked a little bit about this. Those down there, the Love is Respect and Teen Dating Violence, those are two of the common ones that I use. There's a few more, as well as there's National No More, as well as there's the End Abuse and WCASA as well in town, or in online, that is local to Wisconsin, and they will give more direct resources or more things that can apply within the Midwest region instead of, things over in California and Texas and things like that. So
Sam, I had a question.
Yeah.
For you. You have mentioned several times, I think it's a really great idea, this idea about helping kids set boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about some specific examples of what kind of boundaries you help them set, or
Yeah.
what parents can help them set, like what are the important ones for them? I mean, I
Yeah,
have people in my head that I'm
so-
really curious about what you work with kids on.
Yeah, so if we talk about, and again, every kid is going to be very different. And when we talk about the age too, so hypothetically, I'll talk to, so my ninth graders that I work with are those early high schools. Some other districts have eighth grade, but early high school, it's identifying, are they currently dating? Is that something that they're doing, whether their parents know or not? Is that something that they're doing? And talking to them, and my first question to them is, what do you identify as good in your relationship? Those red flags, green flags, I talk a lot about. And I sit down and I'll be like, okay, right, 10 out of what you think a green flag is. And things that they want in a relationship. So when you are dating somebody, what is something that you feel is extremely important to you? Or what is something you see this relationship? And then what is, your red flags? Or a lot of the girls that I talk to say that what gives them the ick, or these different slang terms, but essentially what is not okay for them in a relationship. And when we talk about those, it's really going through like, okay, if you identify that cheating is not okay in your relationship, what does that look like to you? Because it could look like you're just kissing another girl in that relationship, whereas to somebody else, cheating could be talking to another girl, or could having. So what does that look like to you? What is specific? And then having that conversation with them of, do you feel comfortable talking to your friend or to your partner about these things? Because it can be hard, especially a ninth grader. I can't imagine randomly texting their significant other, be like, hey, let's talk about boundaries. I don't feel like that's something that's typically going to be said, but just making sure that they can have that conversation. So if they feel that something is not right, so if they feel insecure or if they get jealous about their talking to their ex, what makes you feel that way? Let's identify that. Or, if it's, you don't trust them, or if you are jealous of the relationship they had, going through that, really digging as much as, you can with them to what their feelings are coming from, and then being able to identify that. I work a lot after we do that with empowering them, because like I said, talking to them is not, or having them talk to the other person is not easy. I don't know that it would be easy really for anybody. However, it's important for them to feel like they have a voice and that their voice is being heard. So when we'll talk about making it a game. So actually what was successful for one of the girls that I worked with, she said that they played like 20 questions, and it was, like, what do you feel is like great about a relationship, or what do you want out of a relationship? Things like that, a way to approach it that she felt comfortable saying something, but didn't make it awkward for her. She's like, yeah, that wasn't awkward at all. Like, I felt that it was actually really good. And, we had a lot of brainstorming activities. It definitely took some time to give, help build up her courage and help build up her ability to do it, because she was definitely very nervous. But just having those conversations, it's really important, I think, for them to know that there's a support there, and that it's okay to not, feed into the norm or not be normal with asking those questions. But it's again, just having as much conversation as possible. I also have found that when I talk to some of the teens, they'll tell me that they love to have conversations like that, not always with people that they see daily, regardless of if it's a parent or caregiver, a teacher, a aunt or uncle, things like that, because then they have a chance to separate it as well. So if as a parent or caregiver, you don't feel comfortable having a big part of that conversation, or, there's some things you're good talking about, there's others that you're like, I'd rather just be a support than, have to do all the there are definitely other resources and areas that different things can be covered. I know the school counselors, they're definitely a great resource, as well as just checking in, especially since they may notice things when they're at school, being different or changes, things like that. So, and then again, that changes too if you talk about like friendships and how they feel that they can like approach it and do different brainstorming with it.
I liked how you had in the slides about, talking early,
Mhm.
because lots of this could apply to just friendships.
Yeah, absolutely.
In elementary school, and that gives kids practice. Although I think you always have to recognize that when it becomes a romantic relationship, it shifts. Even if you had a kid who's the best negotiator with friends and has really good boundaries with friends, sometimes when there's a romantic relationship or a romantic component, it gets stickier and harder.
Yeah.
And just know that even if your kid's really good in elementary school navigating friends, they may not be as good at navigating romantic relationships. They may be really good at it because they've had lots of practice, but it's like throwing a wrench into it, and so it's harder.
Yeah, and then I think too that outlines too where it's I know the Child Advocacy Center and their involvement's a little bit different because there has to be a referral sent over to them and stuff. However, they do great in terms of letting parents know like to have these conversations as early as possible is wonderful in terms of just like what is okay to do in a friendship. Like your hands are meant to be kept to yourself, or I'll talk to second grade teachers and they'll be like, the amount of like touching and pushing and like grabbing that is happening. She's like, it's crazy. And it's like to just have those conversations early on, because then that opens a door also to have that comfortability level. Like that's normal in a parent and child relationship. I have seen and I feel that with the families that I've worked with, if those conversations are started early, kids identify that as normal. Whereas if there are not a lot of those conversations about safety, boundaries, relationships, things like that, when they're younger and then they get to be a teenager and then it's brought up, it's like, oh, where is this coming from? It's not really a culture shock, but it's definitely a very different conversation and it's more of caught off guard. Whereas if those conversations are started early on, or, every other year, it's like, oh, remember when we talked about this? Like, how's that going? Or, you're getting older. Things are definitely different. Like even just approaching it every now and then, I feel is certainly beneficial, because then it's not taboo anymore, right? It's not a surprise. It's, oh yeah, mom or dad or, whoever checks in every now and then, and we just talk about it and it can be more normalized to them. All right. And I know there's a lot of other things I could have included too. I didn't want to take hours upon your time. So are there any questions or anything? No.
Sam alluded to the Marshall Clinic having a
Yes.
thing. It's actually on this Friday.
Next Friday. This is Friday. You're right. Oh my gosh, it is already this Friday.
Friday the 11th. And it is on
digital well-being and
well-being. So they have some speakers having to do with the impact of technology and social media on us, and especially on youth and on the youth brain. And so they have a speaker that's going to talk about sort of teens and the impact on teens and the choices that they're making for good and bad. And I don't remember his name, Kelsey Offenwager, Dr. Offenwager is going to talk about the impact of technology on younger kids in brain development. Ariel Andrew, who has been a frequent speaker, so some of you who've been here before know who Ariel is. She's going to talk about brain development, and she's going to do a similar presentation as she's done for for the series about the dopamine loop and how social media can be very addictive to the brain, and how it messes with mental health in that kind of way. And then my understanding is they're going to do a panel discussion. So there's a couple school personnel, I think the police liaison officer and some therapists are going to be on a panel to talk about sort of the real life things that we see in Marshfield with the kids that are going on and some of their biggest concerns. It's like a professional development, but it's usually professional developments are very expensive. It's only $50, so it's like a really good deal, and it's a really excellent talk. And I haven't looked, but when they were planning, said they were going to do a recording of it. And I don't know if you have to register to be able to see the recording. So if you can't go to the presentation, you might have an opportunity to be able to watch it, or you probably still have to register and pay because that's how things work, but you might have an opportunity to do that. So if you're not going to do it, but you think some other people would be interested, I would highly recommend it. They do this presentation with the money they get from Mike's Run every year, which is focused on mental health. And sometimes it's very adult oriented, and this year it's very youth oriented. So I think it's going to be really, really good.
Yeah. And I'm really excited because I do know that some of the topics are much more prevalent in terms of like what is going on right now. It's not statistics from 2-3 years ago or topics from information 2-3 years ago. It's very recent and it's very now real time, which I think will be really good because things are changing so fast. I mean, I can talk about stuff that happened 6 months ago and it may not even be accurate anymore now, which is crazy. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody coming, and feel free to reach out if there's any questions. I do know that Joanne has all my contact information. Otherwise, I do have things that are up there as well. If anybody wants anything.